of the concerns that I have is that, and I guess maybe I should start with by asking you this. Do you think that there is a danger with Donald Trump that is beyond what it would be with, just say, President Mike Pence?
It's too soon to tell. My sense is not really. And if anything, I think this gets into the vulnerabilities. Trump represents some kind of fissures and challenges to the Republican Party in the way that Pence does not. And so, but this is kind of a level of inside, Beltway speculation that I don't know the answer to.
I mean, I guess like what I'm talking about is things like Mike Pence is not going to become president with his own security force.
Mm-hmm.
Mike Pence is not going to, and maybe within certain parameters, but not Trumpian level of parameters, even in best case scenario, leverage his position as president to alter, U.S. foreign policy in some instances that I think it's perfectly reasonable to assume that Donald Trump is going to do, right? I mean,
yeah.
In terms of his own family's wealth. I mean, that, and then the question becomes like, how real should we take these notions of authoritarianism and fascism? And I get, obviously, we're not in a position to be able to tell at this point, but is it possible that we won't be able to tell until we realize that we may have taken a fundamentally wrong tact in approaching Donald Trump?
Well, I'm not. When you say the fundamentally wrong, I'm not sure which fundamentally wrong path you're talking about. But
if I want to cleave Donald Trump from the Republicans, and I'm willing to say, okay, and I'm willing as the Democratic Party to say, like, okay, we're going to support President Trump in this approach that he has, whatever it is. Let's call it trade policy. We're going to approach him. We're going to prop him up here and argue that he's doing the best thing for the American public, and it's the Republican Party that's standing in front of him. And that brings his popularity level to, let's say, 55%, 60%, 63%. And then we're dealing with a very popular president. And we go down the line and we find out, like, oh, those authoritarian impulses, those were real.
Yeah.
And now
I would definitely not, think that working with Trump is the way to go. And when I talk about the fissures within the Republican Party, it's not so much a recommendation that the Democrats then, pounce on them and try to work with Trump to exacerbate them. I mean, because I think that is a potentially dangerous way. I just don't know if that statement is contingent on any notion of the difference between someone like Pence and Trump. That's really what.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, then, yes. Okay. I was maybe just trying to use Pence as like a more benign substitute. But so, all right. So give us a sense of the fissures and then how should we approach Trump? Because like I say, my fear has always been that you can approach him as as simply a right-wing threat in terms of all the implications of that on our government and our society, or you can approach him as a full-on authoritarian threat, and whether or not those approaches are mutually exclusive.
Well, I mean, I guess what I would say is that he is the leader of a party that is, and he's an outsider to the party, and that's important to remember, without a tremendous amount of popular support, or necessarily, it's not clear yet, institutional support within the party. So, I mean, I think there's just a couple of harbingers or symptoms that we should really be paying a lot more attention to. So I've been following, for instance, the beginnings of the battle over trade policy. And, Trump, I think probably more than his authoritarianism, more than anything, I think Trump is committed to some kind of fundamental shift on trade policy. And everybody from Paul Ryan to the Club for Growth and all the rest of them have said, no way. Now, the shifts he wants to do on trade policy aren't necessarily in favor of a democratic direction. I mean, it's not like the Democratic Party has been calling for tariffs or something like that. I mean, there's all kinds of ways you can approach the question of trade. So it doesn't mean the Democrats have to cooperate with him at all. But what I'm going to be interested in is how this starts shaking down between Trump and the party on that issue. And here I think and I'm sort of working this into an article right now, the real precedent to be looking at is how Jimmy Carter related to the Democratic Party in his one term as presidency. I mean, he came in like Trump. I mean, I know this sounds like an absolutely insane analogy, but there are a lot of similarities there. He came in like a Trump, very much as an outsider to the Democratic Party, first and foremost. He was, there was plenty of movements during the primaries, anybody but Jimmy Carter, because he was so challenging the Democratic Party on some of its fundamentals. And I think trade is a fundamental to the Republican Party, and Trump and the party are really at loggerheads. I think the other thing that's really fascinating, frankly, is this ongoing battle between Trump and the security establishment. I mean, this is really unprecedented. I can't think of anything quite like this in modern American history, where you have, on the one hand, the CIA basically saying that this man was elected with the help of the Russians. And whatever you think about the truth or not of that claim, it doesn't matter. That's what they're, leaking and saying. And you have Trump there railing every night practically on Twitter against the CIA. I mean, we haven't seen anything like this. And it's doubly ironic because, of course, Ronald Reagan got elected in part, because of the strength of the security establishment behind him. These two issues, the whole question about national security and the CIA and the Russia question is caught up in that, and trade are things where Trump is really at loggerheads with his own party. And then on top of that, we've just seen all these challenges to sort of free market orthodoxy that are growing in the population at large. And then, that's going to be a real thing for Trump to have to navigate. So I think there are developing fissures there. Now, what we do about them, I don't quite know. I think the first thing is to attend to them and figure out where they are, because Trump thus far, so far, he's just been nothing but rhetoric. It's been nothing but speeches. Now he's got to rule. And remember, here's one other thing to keep in mind. This is probably the most inexperienced administration we have seen, in modern American politics.
It's conceivable ever, right?
I would have
at
to
the
kind of
birth
go back
of the nation, right?
I'd have to go back through some of those late 19th century presidents,
right.
But it really is kind of incredible. And I don't say this to, kind of make fun of Trump or whatever, but just, when Elaine Chao is your most experienced administrative operative in your cabinet, right? She's got the longest biography. How you then handle the kinds of political fissures in your own party, right? And then within the government bureaucracy, when you've got the CIA basically in revolt against your own presidency, that would be a hard thing for any politician to handle, let alone somebody like Trump who has zero government experience and zero political experience. People like to make the comparison to Hitler all the time, but here, and I think it's an absurd comparison, but here's where it's a useful comparison. Before Hitler came into power, he had no government experience. He had 10 years of political experience building the largest political party in Weimar Germany. That doesn't just happen, by accident. That took some real political talent. Trump doesn't have any of that. So, you've got all these challenges. You've got an administration that's relatively inexperienced, and some of them are outright government rubes. Remember, George W. Bush had Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney, probably the two most talented Republican government operatives, of the last half century on his side. Trump doesn't. So, again, I see lots of weakness and vulnerability there that I think the atmospherics of tweets and he's a monster prevents us from seeing.
Yes, and I agree with that. But let me just press you a little bit on the trade. Hey, it's Sam Seder. Why don't you subscribe to this channel? You can do so right over here.
Subscribe.